After the feeding of the 5,000, which, as we've said, oh, Dusan, 2:35 in Australia. Dude, you're a trooper to hang in there with us. Drink some coffee. Um, After the disaster of the feeding of the 5,000, when the crowd would make him king, Jesus retires to Caesarea Philippi in Gentile territory. And he looks at his close band of disciples and he asks them, "Who do the people say that I am?" He's, inquiring to find out precisely what it is the people are thinking about him. And of course, they say you're John the Baptist, come back from the dead. Some say you're Elijah. Some say you're one of the prophets or Jeremiah. And Jesus looks at them and says, "Who do you say I am?" This is the question that's put to every single one of us. Who do we say that Jesus is? And furthermore, is what we're saying about him congruent with how he thinks about himself or not? And this is the key question. So here's really where this lesson is going. In the first one, I asked you to imagine yourself in the early church hearing the story this fellow Jesus of Nazareth. What I'd like you to do now is imagine yourself as Jesus, and you have this world that you're in, and you're going to look and you're going to say, what is it that is so influential in your world? What are the big hot button issues, and who are the people that are part of all these issues? And so um, I'm going to suggest to you there are to begin with, three very, very important things that you have to know about Jesus' background, his history, the history of the people of Israel, in order to make any sense at all of what's going on in his conflict with the authorities. You see, Jesus' conflict with the authorities is not something new. It had been going on for hundreds of years. Jesus is just another in a long line of Jews who chose to address what were some very, very critical kinds of issues with regard to the authorities in his time. I'm trying to be very careful how I word this, really careful. Um, so, what's the first thing we have to understand about Jesus' environment? Number one, God was not the ruler of the land. Rome was. And before Rome, there was a period where the Jews had managed to wrest back that kingship under the Maccabean Revolution, but it didn't last more than 100 years, a little more than 100 years. And before that, it was the Greeks and the Ptolemies and then the Persians and the Babylonians. Ever since the exile, God was not the ruler of the land. Others were. And so there is going to develop a desire for Israel to have its own king. Now, we know from kingship traditions in the Old Testament that God was, quote, intended to be Israel's king, but Israel wanted kings like other nations had kings. Um, there's a I want to get into mimetic theory at this point in anthropology and talk about kings as the best sacrifice and the role of kings in sacrificial culture and this and that and the other. Is one of the reasons why the God of the Jewish scriptures wants to reject human kingship as a model because it's scapegoating in its orientation. But suffice it to say that the tradition does not have God wanting the Jews to have a human king. But they do, and he acquiesces Saul, David, Solomon, and so on and so forth, right on down the line until the exile, then the return, new Jewish king Josiah, and we move on down the line to Herod. Now, Herod the Great He's a he's a kind of a wannabe king. You have to understand something. In 63, when Rome, 63 BCE, when Rome took Palestine, Israel, the land, and began governing it and taxing it, um, there was a desire for a king. And eventually, whoever could bribe Rome the best got the kingship, and that was Herod. And Herod and his family would spend a lot of money bribing Rome to both hold that kingship and retain it on through the sons. But Herod had a problem. He was only half Jewish. He was half Idumean. And so Herod was looked at a bit askance, if you know what I mean, because he wasn't fully Jewish. And it is Herod and his sons who are going to be the ruling royalty during Jesus and Paul's lifetimes. But we have to go back to the exile, which takes place in two parts: the northern in 722, the southern in 587, and the South is in particular, and by the way, when we talk about the exile, it's not like the Babylonian army came in and took everybody out of the land. No, no. They took the 1%. They took the leadership, they took the people with money, the aristocracy, the people that could be of value to their society. That's who went off into exile. Okay. The rest remained behind without leadership. But in after the 70 years that the Jerusalem leadership was enslaved in Babylon, they came back, and it wouldn't be but a few hundred years later that Alexander the Great would storm the ancient Mediterranean world and bring it all together as an empire. And this is where he imposes the Greek language, Kini, on all the populations. Um, Emperor worship, all kinds of things about Alexander. But this is going to create some crisis in Israel because Israel has ways of doing things that are different than the Gentiles. And over the course of the next couple of centuries, after Alexander the Great, there will be some rather radical and severe splits in Judaism in the ancient world. And that also just not with the people, we're talking about with the aristocracy and the elites and those in power, because that's where the splits really matter. With the people don't know much, but it's with the people in power, when they split apart, then that's when there's great crises. So we have the introduction into Palestine of Greek culture. That is, these rulers are going to come in and they're going to build Greek cities, complete with Greek theaters and Greek outdoor restrooms and Greek diners. They're going to bring Greek culture into the Holy Land, God's land, where God should be king. And that is going to be seen by many as a desecration of the land. It's also going to raise questions about theodicy for the Jews at that time. And so they began having to deal with questions about the origin of evil. And this century between 300 and 200, excuse me, is when we have the development of the earliest apocalyptic traditions like we find in the first Enoch, and explanations of evil, like we find in First Enoch. In one sense, the next bit I'm going to tell you, you don't have to take exact notes if you don't want, because I'm going to put what I'm going to be sharing with you as a document into into the um, into the group. But I think it's really, really important for you to have a grasp of what happened between the year 200 and in a sense 100 BCE. And the reason I say that is each of us, we in our own countries, we have these events in our country's history that define us and that kind of determine the future of the country. In America, it was the Civil War between 1860 and 1864. Forever changed this country and has ever since set us on a path where we have just been divided between city and country, east and west and middle, elite and workaday world people. The Civil War changed America. You would have examples in your country. Well, there were a series of events long before Jesus was born that changed everything for Judaism. And we need to talk about this in order to understand why Jesus took the positions he took in his lifetime with regard to the state and royalty and violence and these kinds of things. So this is going to be given to you as a document. I'm simply going to highlight what are going to be the key issues. Prior to the Maccabean Revolution, there was already discontent about the temple and the priests. Remember, coming out of exile, there's a priestly line. Who are they supposed to be? They're supposed to be Levites or sons of Zadok, Zadokites. These Zadokites are the only ones that are allowed to be priests and offer sacrifices. You can't do it if you're from the tribe of Judah, tribe of Benjamin, tribe of Ephraim, tribe of Manasseh. You can't be a priest. You have to be of the tribe of Levi and the sons of Zadok in order to be a priest. Well, it soon happens after the Hellenization of Palestine, after the year 300, that the priesthood will be bought. It will be be given through the use of bribes by whoever was governing the governing civic authority at that time. Several hundred years later, by the time we get to Jesus, there are only 4 families in all of Israel, 4, that are supplying high priests to the temple. It's kind of like the Kennedys, the Bushes, the Clintons, and the Obamas or the Trumps, big families, dynasties. So we come from bribery for the high priesthood now to real questionable, uh, real issues with regard to the character of the high priest. But it's worse than that, because there will be some who will become high priest who will not be Zadokites. They will be from other tribes. And this is going to set off a significant chunk of the priesthood that's in the temple, because they don't want to follow a high priest that's unclean. And so in and around the year 200, perhaps, a whole chunk of them are going to leave these priests and they're going to go out into the desert. And they're going to say, God has called us to be a holy priesthood, and that's what we're going to be. And they will start a community. And we know that community is Qumran. And they have a leader. He's called the Teacher of Righteousness. And if you ever get a chance to read some of the hymns in the Dead Sea Scrolls about the Teacher of Righteousness, they're beautiful. Evidently, this figure was, like Jesus, a fairly charismatic figure, a priest who knew his stuff. And he led this group of people out into the wilderness to begin building where they would live for the next several hundred years, and to develop their thinking apart from the official thinking of the temple. At the same time, there would be in Israel and Jerusalem lay people who had means, And they decided, since they weren't priests, they couldn't go out and join the priests, but they could become a holy priesthood. And so they said, if there's a certain number of us that'll get together, and what we're going to do is we're going to have kosher meals in the style of the priests. And we're going to tithe in the style of the priests. And we're going to wear clothing and pray and this and that in the style of the priests. In other words, we're going to take the priestly code upon ourselves as lay people so that when God looks down on Israel, he sees a holy priesthood and he won't rain judgment on the temple. They essentially said we're going to separate ourselves, not just from Hellenization and Greek culture, but we're going to separate ourselves from the masses who are Torah ignorant people of the land. They don't understand how to follow God because they can't read or write. They don't pay attention to Torah. They might not go to synagogue. They have no clue, you know. And so we're going to take this on ourselves and we're going to make sure that when God looks down, he sees a holy people. And these were known as separatists. The the term in Hebrew is perushim, but you would know them as Pharisees. You see, the goal of Phariseeism was not to be holier than anybody else. It was to be as holy as the priests in order to make sure that God didn't curse Israel. You with me on this about the Pharisees? Because we're going to come back to this business of Jesus and the Pharisees. At the same time, there's going to develop a movement within the temple of these rather wealthy priests. The higher up you are in the hierarchy of the temple, the wealthier you are, you know, and that hierarchy is a limited number. It's just the hundreds. That's all. The other thousands of priests that are needed to run the temple's day-to-day operations come from the countryside where the Levites live. They have regular jobs, regular land they plow, whatever they do. They have regular life, but 2 weeks a year they come in and they serve in the temple. You know, they sweep, they mop, they might be door openers, they might be greeters. There's 1,000 jobs in the temple that have to be done, you know, animal cleanup after the animals, all the stuff that goes on in a temple. Okay. These priests come by every 2 weeks, we get a new crop of them and they do jobs. But it's the upper elite priests we're focused on now because it's this group of priests that has fairly much capitulated to Greek customs. Now, this doesn't mean that they didn't eat kosher meals, but it meant that they were succumbing to certain Greek worldviews, and they had a certain approach to dealing with alien or foreign leadership. Let's put it that way. And they were capitulators. Okay, they gave in. These are known as Zadokites because they claim to be the true sons of Zadok, but we know them as Sadducees. All of these groups begin to emerge in and around the years from 200 down to the Maccabean Revolution in 157. This is a very fertile period of time. It's kind of like their Reformation period in a way, when we see, you know, the Calvinists and the Lutherans and the Catholics and the Anabaptists all coming up. Well, here it's this period where we see these sectarian groups rising and beginning to fulfill very specific functions in Judaism. Now, the Maccabean Revolution is going to give us the key to so much of what goes on in Jesus' life. So the more you can read about the Maccabean Revolution, and you can do this in First and Second Maccabees. Please remember that these documents are not quote history unquote. They are written with an agenda and a bias, but pretty much you're going to get, timelines and dates and names and figures. Here's what happens that becomes so significant. There's a guy that's named Antiochus the Fourth. He's a Seleucid. He comes, he takes power, and he adopts the nickname Epiphanes, which means God is manifest. And so he intensifies Hellenistic practice in Judea, but it's in 174, remember, just 1 year later, that the high priest Onias becomes replaced by a high priest named Jason, who is a Hellenized Jew who bribes Antiochus to become high priest, displacing the very pious Onias. This same Jason promotes Greek customs. He builds a gymnasium in Jerusalem, which alienates traditional Jews because Jews did not do their workouts and their sports training in the nude, and Greeks did. If you went to the Greek Olympics, you were watching nude athletes there, my friends, and that was abhorrent to the Jews. Then, a few years later, there's another Hellenizer, Menelaus, who outbids Jason for this high priesthood for using bribery. And Onias is murdered. And then Antiochus Epiphanes is doing his campaigns in Egypt. His army's down there and they're fighting the Egyptians. And Rome forces Antiochus to withdraw. There's a rumor that he's died. And that makes Jason, the guy that got kicked out of the high priesthood, with his group of cohort, his little army there, attack Menelaus in Jerusalem. But Antiochus being alive, he interprets this as a full-blown rebellion. So what does he do? He calls his troops, they come, they crack down on everybody and everything. He bans all Jewish practices, circumcision, Sabbath, Torah study. He enforces Greek worship. And then he goes into the temple and he sets up an altar to Zeus on the high holy altar there in the temple. And this is where he's referred to in the literature that comes from that period as the abomination of desolation. This is Antiochus Epiphanes. He has desecrated the temple. Now, the leadership will take the stones from that altar and they'll go put them in a room in the temple and they'll say, these, we don't know what to do with them. We can't throw them out because they had our sacrifices on them, but we can't use them either because they've been defiled. So we're going to wait for Elijah to return. Elijah will tell us what to do with these desecrated stones. Well, there is a priest from Modin who refuses to sacrifice to the Greek gods. His name is Matthias. And he kills a Hellenized Jew and a Greek official. That is the beginning of the rebellion. And he and his sons, and he has five of them, Judas, Jonathan, Simon, John, and Eleazar, they head to the hills. Now, this is where it gets really interesting because this little family will gather around them enough fighters to engage in guerrilla warfare. They come out of the hills, they attack, and they go back. They're gone. They come out, they same. There's a reason that Antiochus could not beat the Maccabees, and it's the same reason that neither the Russians nor the Americans could beat the Afghani Taliban and terrorists. That's because we're used to very static warfare. We line up our troops, you line up your troops, we do the battle, and whoever wins, wins. Whereas guerrilla warfare, it's all sneak attacks. It's assassinations, small groups going in, creating chaos and havoc, kill, and flee. And they engaged in this guerrilla warfare for a number of years. Matthias would eventually die. Judas, he's nicknamed Maccabeus, and that's why we talk about the Maccabees. But he comes and he takes all of this. to the next level, defeats a number of these Seleucid generals, and begins to work his way toward Jerusalem and recaptures and rededicates the temple in 164. Okay, the Greeks are out. Rome isn't here yet. No Egyptian leadership. We can have Jewish leadership, a Jewish high priest. God can rule the land. But here's what happens. First thing is Judas recaptures Jerusalem. And then the temple is cleansed of all its pagan elements and its altars rededicated um, on what we now know as Hanukkah, commemorating the miracle of the oil tradition. Um, Religious freedom is gained here at this point, and the high priesthood of the temple, these groups that we've talked about, the issues that are involved in and around the temple cult now become exacerbated because when the Maccabees take control, they're going to make Simon a king. Simon Maccabees is going to be the king, but he also makes himself high priest. He becomes the first king and high priest. Okay? He becomes king and high priest. Not in Israel has this ever happened before, because the kingship is not out of the tribe of Levi. It's out of other tribes. But here we have a non-Levite as high priest and king. Now, believe it or not, it kind of works out well for Judaism for a little while. And but there's a lot of resentment about this out in the desert with the Essenes, amongst the Pharisees. Um, and then there's going to begin to develop a way of thinking that comes from the Maccabean Revolution that is oriented toward zeal. And the key figure that the Maccabees looked to in their ideological thinking for what they were doing was Phineas. And those of you that have not heard me talk on Phineas before, I will just include a document that shows you how important Phineas was. But Phineas is the guy in Numbers 25 who goes in and slaughters the Israelite that's copulating with his wife that is non-Israelite. And God loves it, gives the people of Israel an atonement, and gives this Phineas priesthood forever and ever. And zeal is just, that's it, man. You know, if you love the Lord, you'll kill them all. And he's the hero of the Maccabean revolt, and he's also going to be the hero of these movements in Jesus' time and after Jesus' time, where you have Jews that are dissatisfied with Roman rule. They want God to be the king of the land. They want the land to be holy as the temple is holy, as the Torah is holy, because Judaism has three pillars upon which it stands: temple, Torah, and land. But the land had been gone since the exile. What remained were Torah and temple. And that's why after AD 70, no land, no temple, and all that remains is Torah, and Judaism has to reconfigure itself. But it's the grandson of Matthias, John Hyrcanus, who in the late 150s is going to take his Jerusalem army up into Samaria and destroy the Samaritan temple. You have to understand what this is all about. This is all about money. The Samaritans were the northern Israelites after um, the south was taken into Babylon. The northerners gathered together and they built a big, beautiful temple in Shechem. And of course, their particular Torah scrolls said that their temple was to be built on Mount Gerizim, whereas the Torah scrolls in Jerusalem said Mount Zion. But they built this big, beautiful temple. And so when the Israelites come back, and you can read this in Ezra and Nehemiah, they're very, very jealous of Sanballat and the Samaritan temple. They know God wants the temple in Jerusalem. We're going to rebuild the Jerusalem temple. It's the one that counts, etc. Well, that rebuilding process begins and carries on. And by the time we get to Hyrcanus, he's got an army that's big enough, and he goes and he not only beats the Samaritans, but he razes their temple to the ground, destroys it, absolutely destroys it. There's your animosity between the Jews and the Samaritans right there that you'll see in the New Testament. Okay. Now, um, it's uh, it's sad, but I'm looking for my, there we go. It's sad but true that this period, like our Civil War in America or whatever event it was that you saw in your country that was so formative, maybe like a 9/11, it's sad but true that what was happening here during this time and this fervor and zeal for God, which produced a revolution, which produced freedom, okay? They won, becomes the model then for future understandings of Israel and how they're going to handle engagement with foreign powers. So it's not a surprise that this zeal mentality would begin to infect um, a very uh, disgruntled population, a population that is burdened by taxation. I mean, the regular Jew had a temple tax that they had to pay. If they traveled, they paid road taxes and tolls on produce if they were going to market. They paid taxes and liens to landlords and landowners and local authorities. The tax burden was immense. And this doesn't count the money that Herod collects as his tax to send on to Rome. Okay. So the people are heavily, heavily taxed. And it's another reason why the zealot believes that it's perfectly right for them to murder in the name of the Lord because of this oppression. There's another group I want to tell you about that may or may not have existed. I say that because it's a hypothesis. Philip Seigel was a Jewish scholar, and he wrote a book titled "The Holocaust of Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew." But in that book, he develops a thesis that I have often turned to in my mind as something that is perhaps very tenable. Um, so it's also at this time, this Maccabean Revolution time, by the way, is when the book of Daniel is written. Daniel, when it talks about the abomination of desolation, it's talking about Antiochus Epiphanes. Okay. Um, when you have, this is also when the Essene community is going to begin producing some of its apocalyptic renderings of scripture. Um, when you have these movements through that are just in the million in the they're all around you. Okay, they're just part and parcel of your life, like we have in America today with different groups doing their different things. Everybody's going to be affected one way or the other, and so as a result, the people often look for leadership. According to Philip Seigel, there was already from the wisdom tradition of Israel uh, a group of men, always men, who would become leading sages, masters, as it were. And the rabbis want to trace it back to Ezra, but really you can go back five groups of rabbis from Hillel and Shammai back. Um, these sages are the proto-rabbis. The reason I bring them up is because the tendency has always been for several hundred years to trace the second century rabbis back to the Pharisees. Okay, that's been the tendency. Because it's the Pharisees that make good in the Mishnah and the Talmud. Seigel's argument is no, the Pharisees were a different group from this sage tradition. Okay, and so Seigel wants to trace it to this proto-rabbinic tradition, and I think that has far more merit than trying to connect them the two together. Sharon just asked me that question. I got to go see what it was. Did the Jews deny the Samaritans a similar faith as the Jews? Unmute yourself for a second, Sharon. I'm not sure what the question meant. Are you saying that
Yeah, I just
The Judeans would see the Samaritans as like heretics, kind of?
um yeah, like did they think they were the only ones that could believe in the Jewish God
Okay,
that
yeah. So we're gonna get to the Samaritans a little later. Uh, there's much we can say about this. Let me just say this: the Judeans considered the Samaritans so far down the level on the social scale, the Samaritans were below menstruating women. You know. Yeah. Okay. Um, so the first thing that is necessary to learn is the Hellenization of Judaism. The second is the importance of the Maccabean Revolution. Phineas is the symbol of zeal, and all the issues that are taking place in and around the temple and the priesthood. Is the priesthood corrupt? Is it not corrupt? Are the proper priests in the wilderness? Are the Pharisees, as lay priests, are they really keeping God's wrath away from the land? And on and on and on and on and on. You with me in all of this? Okay. The third thing that I think is very, very important to keep in mind is we are dealing with a shame honor culture that is heavily invested in an economy of exchange known as the reward debit based value system. If you do good, you're blessed. If you don't, you're cursed. Okay. It's also known as the Deuteronomic hermeneutic. We can see this play itself out all over the place in Second Temple Judaism, not just in terms of basic economics, but also in religion and class structure as well. And there's a book that I put into the group for you. It's this little book here, Jerusalem in the Time of Jesus. One of the really cool things about this book, like there's the chapter on the Samaritans, Sharon, that's fun to read. One of the cool things about this book is that Jeremias has gone extensively through the Jewish literature and does a marvelous job on the economy, politics, all kinds of things that are going on. But that includes social class and the caste system. So in this book on whatever page this is, you've got a table, and that table there is going to use three different rabbinic sources and compare the three. But here's your basic social structure in Jesus' day. One, priests. Two, Levites. They're the ones that come in and they can go into the temple and clean and this and that and the other. And they sing and they do all administrative work. Third level, full Israelites, just regular, you know, Jacobs and Isaacs that are just their mom and dad are Jewish. Okay. Below them, the illegitimate children of priests. So priests that, might have had an affair and yeah, their children. And below them are proselytes to Judaism, those foreigners that had decided to get circumcised to become Jews. They're fifth on that scale. Right below them are freedmen, those who had been released from their slavery and were free, but they were way down on the social scale. After that comes bastards, bastard children, of which Jesus was one. And below that, temple slaves, and then orphans, and at the bottom, foundlings, and then beneath them, eunuchs and hermaphrodites. But if you look at the chart that he has in here based on race, he's got the Samaritans at the very, very, very bottom here. Um, yeah, and then he's got charts related to despised trades, and camel drivers, ass drivers, sailors, herdsmen, shopkeepers, physicians was a despised trade. Why? Because a physician came in contact with blood, which made you unclean. Butchers, same reason. Dung collectors, copper smelters and tanners in particular because of the smell. Uh, Goldsmiths, flax combers, peddlers, weavers, barbers, launderers, bath attendants, pigeon trainers, tax collectors, and then publicans round out the list of despised trades. There's just an awful lot of hierarchy in ancient Judaism. And it's not just religious, it's not just economic, it's class oriented, it's race oriented, very hierarchical. And I want you to notice Jesus doesn't seem to critique that, at least not straight on. Now, his message is a very covert critique of all these hierarchies based on economies of exchange. His whole message is, but he doesn't come right out and critique it, just like he doesn't come right out and critique Herod. And we don't ever see him critiquing Caesar. You with me on this? His approach to these things is very, very different. Okay. Okay, we got 15 minutes. I've got to do all this. Okay. Um, there were also in Jesus' day, in addition to all these groups that had formed under the Maccabees, there were holy men in Jesus' day, and they're testified to in post 70 CE Jewish literature. Jesus, for example, wasn't the only miracle worker in Israel in his time. There was Honi the water drawer. There was another healer that was quite popular named Onias. Um, so Jesus isn't the only healer or exorcist, although healers and exorcists would have been rare. Okay. Um, I've talked a little bit about class distinctions. There is a distinction that the Pharisees, in particular, would make with regard to a class distinction, but also a religious one as well. Now, if you read the Psalms, you'll notice the psalmist will use the phrase of the poor. Come, Lord, help the poor. Okay. The poor, the aniyim. Um, the the poor are in the Psalms, those who are poor in spirit. So when you read the Psalms, that's what you're reading. But frequently, they're also economically poor. Those who are poor in spirit are those who lack money. When you lack money, you lack options. When you lack options, you're stuck. When you're stuck, it can be very, very hard, right? So the phrase, for example, in Luke, blessed are the poor, and in Matthew, blessed are the poor in spirit. Matthew's not spiritualizing something, and Luke is not economizing something. They're both using legitimate understandings of that same term. Okay. Um, Finally, I want to talk about folk religion, my friends. How many of you read your horoscope? Anybody? Okay. Anybody, do tarot cards? Okay. I was into that for a little while there a few years back. It was fun. Um, how many of you, follow astrology at all or anything like that? You would be into folk religion. How many of you wear crosses around your neck for protection or medals of saints for protection? or have crosses in your home for protection, as you know. I mean, think about all the kinds of superstitious things we do. Well, there was a lot of that in Jesus' day. Okay. There's so much archaeological evidence alone from amulets and things that people wore, the little pieces of paper they had the incantations written on them, you know, the love potions, all the different things that you can think of that would be affiliated with kind of like witchcrafty things, right? This is all part of the warp and woof of the regular Jewish person's life, this folk religion, this magical view of the universe, very superstitious, and there's tons of evidence for it, okay? Um, I'm not saying Jesus ever directly addresses folk religion, but I think he addresses that which is beneath it. So, for example, when he says, "Don't worry about tomorrow," he's telling them you don't have to sit and try and get someone to predict your future for tomorrow. What's your day going to be like? No, no. Today, stay focused on today. Stay in the present, right here, right now. Tomorrow's got enough shit in it, Stay right here. Just stay right here. So I think he may be looking at folk religion and some of those sayings, but the point is there was a lot of it that you don't have in Jesus' day one Judaism. You have lots and lots and lots of views of Judaism and what it means to be a Jew and who should be in power and how they're going to be in power and how God is going to work in Israel and what the people are expecting. And the expectations varied from geographic area to group to anything else, you know? So who do you say Jesus is? The scholars have had a lot of fun with this. Just on my bookshelf alone, just on this shelf right here, I have a book on Jesus the magician, Jesus the healer, Jesus the shaman, Jesus the teacher and prophet, Jesus the exorcist, Jesus the sage. I have two of those. Jesus the marginal Jew, Jesus the king, Jesus the zealot, and Jesus the rabbi. There are so many ways to come at this figure, Jesus of Nazareth. He seems to both fit a lot of categories and at the same time explode any number of them and how they function within his culture. And we're going to see, in particular, one of those get totally demolished in the next talk, and that will be the Son of Man. Okay, I will end this one here. Talk to me.
It's interesting that talking about these amulets and stuff, how they made the bronze snake and they called it Nahushtan. And now they've made the crucifix, which is the same thing as the Nahushtan, no difference.
No,
And people today are so superstitious about everything,
yeah.
they don't know it's a bad luck to be superstitious.
It is not good to be superstitious. But you're superstitious to say it's bad luck to be superstitious.
Yeah, yeah. People are so. My daughter and son-in-law are in Orthodox religion, and they have so much superstition in there. It's unbelievable that to an outside observer, to them it's all normal,
Yeah,
but
right.
it's really, really sad to see.
Yeah.
Michael,
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, I don't know if this question will quite make sense, but in terms of the hierarchy,
Mhm.
how is it? I know you've been saying many things, but how is it that they set it up? Like, um, what were they drawing from? What was things that they drew from that allowed them to set up the hierarchy.
Well, yeah, you've got hierarchy all over the ancient world. First of all, think of Egypt, think of Persia, Babylon, hierarchy. So you've heard me talk about mimetic theory, Sharon, right? Hierarchy comes out of the victimage mechanism, where we learn to create gods, where we learn to create mediating figures between the gods and ourselves. Um, and it's a 10, 20, 100,000 year process, that we humans learn to develop hierarchically. And then, of course, you got gender divisions and everything else.
But Jesus kind of put all that down, didn't he? Like,
Did he?
didn't he?
Did he?
Oh, maybe not.
What do you mean by put it down?
Well, sort of. I thought he maybe kind of erased a lot of that hierarchical stuff, and yet
But
he
how
did.
does he do it? How does he do it? Can you think of a saying of Jesus? Anybody who puts somebody above somebody else is wrong and is going to, whatever. Does he do that? Does he ever
Well,
say stuff like, huh?
he questions their motives, most of the motives of the Pharisees, scribes, and hypocrites.
Michael,
Go ahead.
if you read where this Roman centurion sends for Jesus
Mhm.
to come and heal his child, am I right? Or it was his servant, whom he loved dearly, that he wanted to be healed. Is that correct? If I remember correctly now. And he says, yes, just like you. He says, don't come. It's not necessary for you to come. He actually feels very humble. He says he realizes that Jesus must be very important. And he feels, I'm unworthy for you to even come under my roof. But I am a centurion and I'm in command of people. And I can give an order and people will do it. And you can do the same. Just order and it will happen. He's got so much faith in Jesus' authority there. But Jesus doesn't say to him, no, 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 stop, don't think like that anymore. He confirms that, he affirms it.
Well, let me come back to I agree. Let me on that narrative. Let me come back to Sharon. Take, for example, women. Um, women weren't. I mean, come on, we're dealing with 2,000 years ago. We can't expect there to be, modern feminism back then. But if you were a wealthier woman, you didn't have it so bad. Um, and in Judaism, the role of or place of women within a family system would often depend upon the tradition. Like Rabbi Hillel says, you can divorce your wife if she burns your toast, whereas um, that's not the case for Shammai, who says you can only divorce your wife if she has an affair. Um, and then you got Jesus coming along, and he has the ultimate protection for women: no divorce. If you marry a woman, you're responsible for her for the rest of your life. End of story. Just end of story. Um, but what does he do? Well, he treats the women in his entourage evidently no differently than he treats the men. Second, he allows himself and his entourage to be supported by the donations of a few wealthy women patronesses, right? So his actions are what break down hierarchy. He doesn't need to go out with signs and protest. He just does. We see the same thing with regard to sinners. Um, we'll talk. We have a pericope I want to go through in the next session in Mark 3, where he talks about healing and forgiveness and that narrative. But the Pharisees wonder how in the world can he hang out with sinners, Am Haaretz, the people of the land, the ignorant, the non-Torah observant. How can he do this? And So he's breaking down divisions that way. I think the only time that I can think of, Sharon, is I'm just sitting here kind of mulling my brains trying to work I am tired today. Like I said, Cheryl was at the hospital with her mother all last night, but I just tossed and turned all night, worried about her. But uh, Jesus will challenge the Pharisees, and he will take them on in a way that he does not take on the Sadducees or the Essenes ever. There's no in the Gospels, there apparently aren't Essene interlocutors, and that's probably because so many of the early church priests in the early church were Essenes, and they would have cleaned up that bit of the oral tradition, you know.
And he
Um,
almost puts the Samaritans, oh, he almost puts the Samaritans above the Jews in some cases, doesn't he?
no, where?
Well, in the walking down the road and who is your neighbor
In
and
the story, in the parable.
the Samaritan,
Yeah, yeah. The enemy is your neighbor. Yeah, he does seem to elevate the Samaritan in that story. There's another story as well, where there's 10 lepers, but the only one that comes back was the Samaritan, you know. And then you do have the John 4 text, of the woman at the well in Samaria. So you know what? You're probably right. You're probably right.
But then again, he says the dogs eat the crumbs of the table. That story, to me, it was a bit. Obviously the translation might be a bit misleading there, but I thought that was a bit, down-putting,
You
if I could.
know, there's such interesting very takes on that story, Deval. I'm glad you brought it up. You know, it's uh you can read it as though Jesus is being just your typical Jewish snob, you know.
Yes,
And remember the woman is Syrophoenician, so that means she's what? She's not Jewish,
yes,
right? And she's coming wanting the blessings that are meant for Israel. And he's looking at her going, I don't think you understand how this thing works. And when she comes back and she compares herself to the dogs that eat the food that the children leave behind, right? There's a scholar in Australia, and I wish I could remember his name, and I apologize. Um, he gave me a copy of his dissertation, and it's on this pericope. And his argument in this pericope is that this Syrophoenician woman took Jesus to school and taught him in that event um, about the grace of God and how far it extends. And, you know, I don't know that I want to buy that kind of pushy reading that way, but she certainly um, uh, helped Jesus to cross the boundary, as it were, that he wouldn't cross otherwise, I don't think. It's hard to say. Again, you can't psychologize Jesus. So I don't know whether he would have or would not have done the healing, but she crossed the boundary. She came over to his side and said, "Look, man,
mm,
I'm just a dog. I'm under the table. I just give me a scrap, you know." So
mm. Just one point, I think you might allude to that in more detail later on, but in the week again, somebody tried to take me on that one of your followers that I also befriended on Facebook. She always invites comment on topics that she's thinking about. And I don't think Facebook is an ideal place to really have deep discussions on that. I soon realized that I should not even, prolong my discussion. It's going nowhere. But in any case, it's this thing about activism. And since I've learned my mimetic desire and how any kind of activism will immediately put me in a position of a scapegoater, because at some stage I'm going to have to take a stance against a certain view of things. And then immediately I'm going to side with my side that believes as I do. And of course, then I'll have to defend that view. And that just puts me back in the cycle of scapegoating. And she tried to draw me in, referring to Matthew 23. And then I immediately went to the Jesus-driven life, and I did a search, Matthew 23. What does Michael have to say about this? Because I need to now think about this, but I'm not sure what to say about it. And so, Jesus is not an activist, but you can easily, if you want to be an activist, you can easily find justification for how he acts in certain instances to say, but he was an activist. And he had a stance, and he took people on, actively, and he defended a certain position.
You'll notice
Is that
Jesus
so?
never takes anybody on until they take him on. He doesn't go after anybody. They come after him. Was Jesus an activist? Oh, he was very active. Was he an activist the way our current activists are activists? Absolutely not, because they're ideologically driven by a philosophy. Jesus wasn't. Jesus was driven only by his mission. Jesus never had a cause. The kingdom of God for Jesus was not a cause. Everything had to do with his Father. This is why I frankly think modern liberal Protestantism is at a total dead end, because it has no gospel, it has no Father, it has no God, it has no risen Lord Jesus, and so it's unable to forgive, it's unable to really love. It wants diversity except for the white male. It wants inclusion except for the white male. It wants equity except for the white male. So white liberal Protestantism, they've got their scapegoat, And then you got all the white males that are part of that movement that sit there and beat themselves up and flagellate themselves, hoping to look good. It's just stupid. Sorry.
And I think that is something that a lot of us need to learn. It took me a long time to learn that, Michael.
Yeah, well, remember, when you go to Jesus' cleansing of the temple, that's the only social action involving an institution that we see Jesus involved in. And so it becomes very, very important to parse out what the narrative says is going on as opposed to what we want it to mean. So the narrative never uses the word orge. Jesus doesn't, or thumos. You don't see Jesus angry or mad. It says, what did he do? He flipped over the money changers' tables. Why? Why the money changers? Number one, why would he flip over the money changers' tables? Anybody?
Usury?
No.
Flipping the tables is an acted parable.
But why? Why would he flip money changers' tables?
It's an acted parable, which is opposite picture of Moses letting go of the snake.
I don't know about that. Let me ask you this question, Dusan. You're from Galilee, you're from Perea. Whose coins are in your pockets? How are you paying for things? You might have a Herodian coin, you might have Roman drachma, right? What do you need to make a purchase in the temple? What's the only coinage?
Temple coin.
The what?
The temple coin.
Oh, who makes the temple coin? Who mints it?
Sure.
The temple, the Jerusalem temple, had the finest gold in the world because it had an agreement with the city of Tyre, remember, up north, where they had the gold mines, and they used Tyrian gold as the coinage of the temple. Non-Israelite gold, pagan gold. They used a pagan coin to run God's holy temple. And so the tables in the temple were like FX exchange markets. When you go to an airport, you got American dollars, you go to New Zealand, you go to the Bureau de Change and you exchange your dollars for New Zealand dollars or whatever. Well, the same thing here. But in the temple, Tyrian gold only. So why is Jesus flipping the tables?
So, Michael, are you saying that Jesus wouldn't have flipped the tables if it wasn't, if it had been Tyrian gold, then it would be okay?
Let's say it had been gold that came from, I don't know, Modine, a little Jewish village, right? Why would he have flipped the tables?
Well,
What
isn't
else
it
did he do?
looking at two governments in the sense, like money rules versus or Jesus?
When you have pagan money in your pocket, you know, in your who's your allegiance to, right? Okay. Now, why does he take time? Let me ask you this. If you were hanging out in a temple and you saw, you know, scraps of leather lying around, how long would it take you to put together a whip, to make a whip? It would take you an hour or more to sit and make a whip, long enough to start smacking some cows and some goats and some stalls so that they flee, right? What's he doing? By turning over the money tables, changers tables, and setting the animals free. He's stopping the sacrificial process. Do I have any more evidence of that? Sure. Mark says he prohibited anyone from carrying a skuos through the temple. Skuos is the term for like a plate or a tray upon which a sacrifice would be laid. He's shutting down the sacrificial process in the turning of the tables, the freeing of the animals, and the prohibition to carry skewoi around the temple. It's all about sacrifice. This is not a social protest. Chad Myers is all wrong when he says this is Jesus, you know, getting out there with his disciples and their signage. We down with the priests, down with the priests. You know, you don't have that. That's not what this is about. You see, you can make it about that, and they do. Everybody uses the conservatives use the temple narrative to justify their violence. Jesus got angry and smacked people with a whip, therefore we can go to war and kill the Russians. That's their logic. And then the liberals go, oh, Jesus went in, flipped the tables because he hated the institutions and governments, and that Jesus was an activist. And that's all bullshit. This is what I'm trying to show you. When you go to the Gospels, we can't make Jesus in our image, man. He looks nothing like us or what we want him to be. I've had to work very hard not to turn Jesus into a 1960s hippie. I have. I really have. It's very easy to want to make Jesus look like me.
Michael,
Instead of the other way around, where I'm called to look like him.
I just want to ask a question. Maybe I missed something there, but the money tables, how does that relate to sacrifice?
Huh? Well, a couple of reasons. One, what do you have to have in order to get a sacrifice? You have to purchase something, right? You need money to purchase a sacrifice. The only money
Or whatever.
is the temple coin. Stopping that process, you stop in the purchasing process. Then you go in and you break up the supply lines with the animals, right? And then you notch it up a step, and you're telling you're stopping the people that have these sacrificial vessels, you know, and they're heading up with their sacrifice. You're stopping them. You know, that's about as activist as Jesus ever got. Does that make any sense?
Yes, to me, that is not activism in the sense that we know it. It is
Jesus wasn't a Marxist.
It is to stop transactionalism. as part of the sacrificial. Is that correct? Yeah, and I think if you do that, then you're saying to both sides, stop living transactionally.
Mhm.
Stop the scapegoating process
Yeah.
where somebody must be right and somebody must be wrong. All are wrong, but all are forgiven. He's just not saying that in
Amen.
words.
Amen. Hey, my lower back is giving me issues, as you know. I'm hoping that we could I'm going to stop recording for a second here, and there's